Well, I think anybody who has watched much from my channel knows that I identify with the Pure Land tradition, specifically Jodo Shinshu, or the true Pure Land school of Shinran Shonin. But again, as I've indicated also in a number of ways, I've maintained an interest in the broader Mahayana tradition in terms of particularly the Mahayana scriptures, the sutras, which to my mind are just so incredibly profound. Some of the most profoundest human writings and thoughts, I think, that have ever been created. Undoubtedly, there have been some related kinds of writings and insights in Western civilization, Western culture. But, to have those truths be expressed so articulately and so with such amazing clarity, so consistently across so many different scriptures or sutras is just mind-blowing to me. Now, again, none of them can express the ultimate truth in definitive terms. In other words, we've established clearly that that can't be done with the nature of human thought, human concepts, human words, and language. But as far as having so-called a finger pointed at the moon, I tell you, it's a very impressive array of scriptures that we have available to us. And one of the things they say in Buddhism is we're very fortunate to be born as a human, because Buddhists think about there as being different sort of modes of rebirth. And beyond that, it's very fortunate to be exposed to the Dharma. I certainly feel fortunate in that regard, because back in 1979, when I first had some inklings of a spiritual dimension in a very experiential way, there weren't that many things written in English about Buddhism, but thankfully I was able to find some things, and thankfully they did draw me in, and thankfully I have maintained my interest in and commitment to this Buddhism religion, and it is a religion, over the course of these 45 or however many years since I converted to Buddhism. Now, one of the most impressive kinds of types of scripture or sutra within the Mahayana canon, and there are many, are the so-called Prajnaparamita Sutras, or the Wisdom Sutras, prajna meaning wisdom. And within those 40 or so Prajna Sutras, the one that's the shortest is the Heart Sutra. And this is one that's recited in many temples across the country and across the world every day in a variety of different languages. I've recited it a number of times, and on at least one occasion you can find it on my channel with Chinese and English text screens, thanks to my friend Sean in the United Kingdom. But in any case, I've been participating in a Zen group recently, online in Zoom format, and they have a weekly service where one of the things they do is they recite the Heart Sutra. And so this is a version or a translation that I've not recited before, and maybe I'll finish this video by reciting the whole thing. But for now, I thought I would very arrogantly maybe walk through it sort of line by line and just throw out some spontaneous comments off the cuff to give some little sense of my own musings about some of the meaning and some of the profundity associated with this Prajnaparamita Sutra. So in this particular translation, they indicate that the title is called The Heart of the Perfection of Great Wisdom Sutra. So that's kind of neat, that of all the range of Mahayana sutras and of all the range within that of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, this little gem is kind of at the heart. And that's kind of a nice expression of what the meaning is and the significance is of these however many few 18 or so lines of text. And the first line introduces a particular bodhisattva. I've heard his/her name pronounced different ways. And if you'll excuse whatever my particular pronunciation is, if it deviates from your preferred pronunciation, but I'll call it him because he was first introduced to us as a male in the Lotus Sutra, chapter 25. And his name is Avalokiteshvara. And he represents infinite compassion. And by the way, happens to be an emanation of Amitabha Buddha or Amida Buddha. In fact, whenever you see the iconography of Amitabha Buddha, in other words, Amida, when you see him in a painting or in statue form, that you will see him flanked by two bodhisattvas, and that's typical within Buddhist art, is that the Buddha is typically flanked by two major bodhisattvas, one representing compassion, one representing wisdom. And in the case of Amitabha, it's Avalokiteshvara that represents compassion. So here we have in the first line, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva coursing in deep prajna paramita. So in spite of the fact that he is the ultimate or penultimate representation of compassion, that here he's immersed himself in prajna, which is the term for wisdom within Mahayana Buddhism. And a paramita, I think the translation is probably perfection, and refers to the fact that the practices of the bodhisattva involve 6 of these so-called perfections or paramitas. And I think the notion is that these are the practices that assist the bodhisattva in his or her aspiration for enlightenment to get over the sea of suffering to that other shore of nirvana or enlightenment. But of course, at the end of the day, they take a vow that they're not going to take that step and make that accomplishment, if you will, until they can help all other beings get on the great ship of the Mahayana in order so that everybody can get salvation and attain the bliss of enlightenment or nirvana. So anyhow, when Avalokiteshvara coursed in the deep prajna paramita, he clearly saw emptiness of all 5 skandhas. I did a video on skandhas, and you can check it out. It's fairly crude because this is a pretty advanced concept within the earlier form of Buddhism as to how Buddhists conceptualized the nature of being, the nature of what makes us up as individuals. What are the components or the heaps of substance that constitute a person? And so, if you look those up and you study them, it's very informative. But what Avalokiteshvara is seeing here is that in an ultimate sense, those skandhas are empty. In other words, it's just like with atoms. In other words, what they originally thought in science was namely that everything is made up of atoms, which itself was an amazing accomplishment and insight, as we got hold of microscopes and things like that to be able to see these teeny tiny components of objects, of matter, and even of ourselves, made up of these atoms, electrons and protons and neutrons. But then, as the scientists got better and electron microscopes and more theories and mathematical models, that they realized that, hey, it's not, our particles are not really sort of stable particles that represent the ultimate nature of reality. That somehow it's kind of a dynamic process of waves and particles and all kinds of stuff that really can't be pinned down with just simply a dualistic, if you will, explanation of its ultimate nature. And that's basically what Avalokiteshvara is realizing here, is that we can talk about different components that make up a human being, but at the end of the day, those components are only helpful as a conceptual framework in a relative or mundane sense and not in an ultimate sense. And really, he's talking here to Shariputra, and throughout this brief scripture or sutra, he's going to be making the same conclusion about a number of things, as you'll see. But just to recite the first 3 lines here again, I'll add the 3rd line. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, coursing in deep prajnaparamita, clearly saw emptiness of all five skandhas, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. So it gets to the fact that our misfortune and pain are related to our ignorance about the nature of reality, the true nature of reality. That it's because we have this dualistic framework that we even can be thinking about pain versus pleasure, happiness versus sadness, etc. That it's possible for an enlightened person, which I am not, and I have no aspiration to be so, other than in my next life when I'm reborn in the Pure Land, because I don't have the capability. But the point is, if somebody did, that they would have the opportunity to transcend those kind of dichotomous polar opposites. And that's what Avalokiteshvara perceived. He completely relieved misfortune and pain, and that's the way he accomplishes his assistance to human beings, is that he does help human beings to get a better insight into the true nature of reality, which is non-dual. So then again, speaking to Shariputra, which is one of the Buddha's disciples, he's a Shravaka, which is a hearer, a person who listens to the Buddha's teaching and tries to accomplish fulfillment of the teaching in the best way that he knows how, relative to the insights that he has and the practices that he engages in, which would be, in essence, things like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. But that's getting ahead of ourselves, because this Heart Sutra also addresses the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. But first he talks about form. He says, form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness no other than form. Now this, to me, is critical, because I've been talking about non-duality, but this implies that not only could we provisionally talk about every person and thing being empty of any independent, separate existence, but that also to talk exclusively in those terms is also in error, because emptiness is no different than form. So that kind of really blows your mind, because it's the ultimate paradox. And in fact, I think in some of the sutras, the Buddha warns against people getting hung up on emptiness. Now, emptiness is emphasized in many of the sutras, many of the scriptures within Buddhism, particularly in the Mahayana. Why? Because our usual dualistic form of thinking is so prevalent and so dominating within our mundane existence. So Buddhism tries to jerk us out of that dualistic thinking. But at the end of the day, to the extent that we get a glimpse of emptiness as being, in some sense, a new perspective and a different perspective on reality that has great merit, that then Buddha wants to pull us back and say, but wait a second, emptiness is also form. Form is also emptiness. So that's the paradox, and the thing we can't really get hold of with our thinking mind. We're just not capable of doing it. Now, can we get brief glimpses of that insight through experience of prajna, which each individual has somehow the seed to be able to experience? Yes, but to do that on a consistent basis, we would have to be a Buddha. And, that's beyond, as I say, beyond my capability, and beyond the capability probably of 99.9% of us human beings. So I'm going on too long on this, but he then goes on to say, form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness exactly form. And says the same about sensation, perception, reaction, and consciousness, which are these five skandhas that we were talking about. And likewise, Shariputra, all things are expressions of emptiness, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure. Not born. This is the thing I see in many of the Mahayana sutras, the idea of unborn. And the phrase that I most relate to in this regard, or the one that I've memorized and that comes to mind, is that what the Bodhisattva ultimately realizes is an experience is the patient acceptance of all things as unborn. And so that's very deep, because we ordinarily think of ourselves as having been born. I was born in such and so year, and and ultimately I'll die. But in this framework of this ultimate truth that this sutra is trying to point to, even though it can't articulate it in full ultimate form because words are not capable of doing that, he's saying, and the Buddha is saying, that the nature of reality, in the nature of reality, in the realm of reality, there is neither birth nor death. There is neither existence nor non-existence. So that's pretty heavy stuff. So again, there's no loss, there's no gain. These opposites fade away or are transcended somehow. So in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, perception, reaction, consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, smell, taste, touch, thing, no realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance, no end to ignorance. So all these different sense organs, sense objects, none of them have, in a sense, ultimate reality. They are all sort of dissolved with the insight of shunyata, or emptiness, within the Buddhist framework of doctrine. And here, as I say, if there's no birth and death, then there's no old age and death, and no end to old age and death. So the dukkha, the suffering associated with sickness, old age, and death, these two are empty. And of course, if there's no suffering, there's no cause or end to suffering. There's no path, meaning no eightfold path, no wisdom, and no gain. No gain. That one is really a kicker. That's the bottom line in many ways. There's no gain, nothing to gain. So all of the sutras, all of the admonitions to the bodhisattvas to, accomplish these tremendously arduous, really impossible, idealistic kinds of self-power feats, is basically to get the bodhisattva to the point that he or she realizes that, okay, this was an exercise to enhance a deeper sense of reality and a deeper appreciation of the interconnectedness that leads to a deeper sense of pity and empathy and compassion for my fellow beings. But that, as in the Diamond Sutra, it says, I also then need to experientially somehow realize simultaneously that there are no beings, there are no separate beings. And if that's the case, there is no gain. So even the bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment at the end of the day, is set aside in the context of this profound prajnaparamita scripture. No gain. Thus bodhisattvas live prajnaparamita. It's more than an intellectual insight. Yeah, we can think about it. We can say, hey, that's a really cool idea. But at the end of the day, it's not a question of intellectual understanding. It's a question of living prajnaparamita. And the bodhisattva who lives that prajnaparamita has no hindrance in mind, no hindrance, and therefore no fear. And fear is such a basic thing. I experience fear. I because I view myself, John, as having been born, and because I'm 76 years old and realize that in terms of my mundane perspective and my ignorance that I'm going to die, that makes me afraid. Not so much of death as much as of the dying process. And this is where Amitabha's vow, Amita's vow, comes to play to give me comfort to know that I'm embraced by Amita, and that I'm I'm the object of that vow because of my evil nature and all the bad things I've done, that in spite of that, that the vow was made for me, and that by virtue of entrusting in it, I'll be reborn in his land of bliss when I die and become a Buddha at that time. Then I'll be free to become a bodhisattva and have this level of insight, this prajna that will allow me then to assist other beings while at the same time not being caught in the trap of thinking that, there really is a differentiation between myself and other beings. So, therefore, the bodhisattva attains supreme perfect enlightenment. Prajnaparamita is the great mantra, and then it ends with that great mantra, Gate, Gate, Para, Gate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha. But because I've been so long-winded here, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to recite this thing in toto and use my usual, some would say overly dramatic recitation style. But here goes. The Heart of the Perfection of Great Wisdom Sutra. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, coursing in deep Prajnaparamita, clearly saw emptiness of all five skandhas, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form. Sensation, perception, reaction, consciousness are likewise like this. Shariputra, all things are expressions of emptiness, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. So in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, perception, reaction, consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No color, sound, smell, taste, touch, thing. No realm of sight, no realm of consciousness. No ignorance and no end to ignorance. No old age and death and no end to old age and death. No suffering, no cause or end to suffering. No path, no wisdom, and no gain. No gain. Thus, bodhisattvas live prajnaparamita. With no hindrance in mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond all such delusion, nirvana is already here. All past, present, and future Buddhas live prajnaparamita, and therefore attain supreme, perfect enlightenment. Therefore know, Prajnaparamita is the great mantra, the luminous mantra, the supreme mantra, the incomparable mantra, by which all suffering is cleared. This is the truth, not a lie. Therefore set forth the Prajnaparamita mantra, set forth this mantra and proclaim, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha, Prajna Heart Sutra. Namandabs, Namandabs, Namandabs.